Hello, and welcome to the final part in this series of Intro to Java. So far, we've covered declaring variables and installing Eclipse, methods, if and else statements, for loops, while loops, and do while loops, and the string class, as well as some other stuff. In this episode, we'll be covering basically what we've already gone over, which is conventions of Java. But first, I'd like to go over this assignment because, for the most part, all of these have answers right here that you can look at if you're just comparing for answers. But you'll notice that 5 and 7 also have multiple answers, and I'll explain why right now. So we're at question 5. It asks, what is the best name for a method given that the method dictates whether or not a shooter on a robot fires? So A or B are honestly both fine choices. They both give you enough information. They're both fine answers. I don't think there's one of them is better than the other. They're both great. So I wish I'd written that better. But yeah, so A and B are both fine answers. I don't have a preference for either of them, honestly, but maybe your software subteam lead does. But I think they're both fine numbers or fine method names. 7. So 7, A or B are fine answers. I intended for B to be the right answer, but I realize now that Boolean and strings are both variables. I was not thinking in terms of variables. I was thinking in terms of Boolean as a primitive, string as a object. Well, yeah, string is a class, but you can make string objects. And then for and while loops are obviously both loops. But if I wrote for loops and while loops, it would be kind of obvious that's the right answer. So I think that's everything I wanted to go over. And you can just look at the answers over here. It's been up for a while. You can just pause the video if you need to look at those. But I think we're done with that. Alrighty. So this is going to be a pretty short episode. Something I didn't mention that I want to bring up now is if you press Control S whenever you're working with a class, you can save your progress. You don't have to go File, Save right here. I'm sure some of you already figured that out because it says Control S there, or maybe you're just skilled with computers, or you just know how to save things. But you don't really have to. It's just a nice shortcut, so you don't have to file save, and then you can just Control S, or this little save button right here. There's a bunch of other things up here that you probably don't have, but don't worry about those. So the first thing I want to go over is same line versus next line. We've already talked about this before, but they don't really matter. I'm pretty confident that next line is the preferred method because it just makes the most sense, I guess. Especially in like other programming languages, like I know C# automatically formats like this. So this is probably the preferred method that you use, but they honestly don't matter. As long as throughout your code, you do not change which one you use. If you keep using the same one, it's fine. But if you change it in the middle, then it's a little convoluted to understand. It's not convoluted to understand, it just doesn't look nice. So just try to keep the same one throughout, and you'll be fine. Commenting is the next thing we're going to go over. As you can see, there's two different types of comments. You can do the // like that, or you can do /asterisk is what I meant to say, and then hit enter, and then it'll make the rest for you. And you can just keep hitting enter, and it will make more lines for you. So pretty helpful. Important things to note for commenting: try to comment as often as you can, but not too often. A good way to know when to comment your code is when you have a complex function that's going on that you need to describe, so that other people can understand what you tried to do or that you did do. But you don't need to comment for lines that are just like declaring things or stuff that's pretty self-explanatory. If you think that you need to explain it, then you probably should. Or if it's just a really long chunk of code that has an unknown function, then you should probably describe it. But you should always avoid not commenting. And honestly, if you over-comment, I think that's more preferable than if you just don't comment at all. But try to avoid both. Try to just have try to only comment code that needs explanation. If it doesn't warrant an explanation, then you don't need to comment it. Okay. Naming. I think we've gone over this before, but basically when you name things, try to give them names that are understandable. So like say I had a method. Call it public. This would be for like say robotics. Let's say we had a method that returned the shooter speed, right? And we'll return 0 for now because we don't have a method currently to get that. So, but when you're reading through code, if it makes it a lot easier if the name is pretty self-explanatory, because trust me, when you start programming for robotics, there is a lot of methods that you'll be working with in the same class. So it'll be really helpful for you and for everyone else on your team if method names are all pretty self-explanatory, like shooter speed. Oh, I can make that better if I said get shooter speed. Now it's pretty obvious what it does, and anyone who's reading through this code will immediately know what this does and know that it returns an int, which is the speed. Although it probably would be a double, but well, maybe. But don't worry about that. It's not that big of a deal for now because we're not really just using it for an example's sake. So if you can make variable names the most useful, and obviously method names as well. And then obviously you can't type with a 1, but you can use the $sign. That's fine. What I should have mentioned earlier is that you can use a number in the name. It just can't be at the beginning. It can be, at the end, and then you can also use underscores. That's fine. You can use underscores at the front, I believe. Yes, you can. Okay, that's all fine stuff. What else to go over? So we're gonna get into this more next series, but if your software subteam lead has already had you install it, or you have already installed it, GitHub, which is a really good way to share code, right? So when you're working on the whole robot thing, that you're all good to go. From personal experience, it's really not in your best interest to push code when you, and we'll be going over this again next season, or next series, I should say. It's really, you don't need to push code when you make minor edits to code, or comments or anything like that, or variable name changes. Only push code when you make significant changes that could alter the function of the program or anything like that, or if you really feel that it's gonna drastically alter the program, or you're adding a lot of comments, then that's totally fine. But if you're only changing a few things, there's no point in pushing it. I'll be going more into that next series, but for now, just if you already have it installed, or your software subteam lead only wants you to go through the basic stuff that I've provided in this series, then just know that for GitHub. Important to know. You don't want to over push code, because it's just a mess. Because you can get issues with code, and it's not fun to work with. Let's see, what else could we go for? I guess I'll give you an example of comments. Basically, it goes without saying, it's helpful if you use proper grammar, right? I know, for example, on my robotics team, a lot of people will use comments as a way to say funny things and throughout code. It's funny, I will not deny that, but it's not helpful. So try to avoid doing it unless you have a really relaxed software subteam lead, then you're fine. But try to avoid doing it just so that the code is easy to understand and you don't have to worry about right. So that you only have comments that are describing function. You don't have to worry about comments that are just nonsense. But I think I've covered everything that I wanted to. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this series. Next series we'll be covering advanced Java stuff. For example, classes and objects. Classes and objects, and then we'll do advanced string things. For example, enhanced for loops, which I think I covered. before, but now we can actually get into them. Arrays and pretty much all higher level Java stuff. Right? We still have to wait a bit until we can get to the robotics goodies, because trust me, that will not be fun. But you still got to do it because you decided to be in robotics. But I'll try to make it as enjoyable as I can. But I think that's about it for this series. So I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.